"Hide me," she begged the stranger. The Duke pulled her closer. "That will cost you." The rain had not yet begun to fall, but Arabella Thornwood could feel it coming. The air in Lord and Lady Pemberton's ballroom hung thick and heavy with the promise of a storm, mingling with the overpowering scent of hothouse flowers and the cloying sweetness of too many perfumes applied too liberally by ladies desperate to mask the evidence of exertion on the dance floor. She stood in her customary position near the wall, 3 steps behind Lady Whitmore's bath chair, invisible in the way that companions were meant to be invisible. Her gown was grey, not the fashionable dove grey that young ladies wore to appear interestingly melancholic, but the serviceable grey of a woman who could not afford to have her single good dress show stains. Her hair was pinned back with ruthless efficiency, no artful curls softening her face, no ribbons or ornaments to draw the eye. She had learned, in the 3 years since her fall from grace, that invisibility was its own form of armour. "Fetch me some lemonade, there's a dear," Lady Whitmore said without turning around, her attention fixed on the dancing couples before them. "And perhaps some of those little cakes, if there are any left, the ones with the pink icing." "Of course, my lady." Arabella slipped away from her post, grateful for the excuse to move. Her feet ached from standing motionless for 2 hours, and her shoulders had begun to cramp from holding herself so still. She made her way along the edge of the ballroom, keeping close to the wall, her eyes fixed on the middle distance in the manner of a servant who wished to draw no notice. She had almost reached the refreshment tables when she felt it, that prickling awareness at the back of her neck that she had learned never to ignore. He was here. Arabella did not turn around. She continued walking at the same measured pace, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs with the familiar rhythm of hunted prey. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps it was merely her imagination, conjuring threats from shadows, as it had done so many times before. Perhaps tonight, for once, she would be allowed to perform her duties and return home without incident. "Miss Thornwood." The voice came from directly behind her, too close, and Arabella's stomach turned to ice. She stopped walking, her hands clenching into fists at her sides before she forced them to relax. Slowly, with the appearance of calm she had perfected through years of practice, she turned to face Sir Marcus Blackwell. He was smiling. He always smiled when he cornered her, that particular expression of a cat that has trapped a mouse and intends to play with it before the kill. Sir Marcus was handsome in the way of men who knew their own worth and expected others to acknowledge it. Dark hair, silvering elegantly at the temples, a strong jaw, eyes the colour of a frozen pond. He dressed impeccably, moved with the assurance of wealth and influence, and had been pursuing Arabella with patient, implacable determination for 3 years. "Sir Marcus," she kept her voice even, respectful, entirely without warmth. "I did not know you would be attending this evening." "Did you not? But I am always where you are, Miss Thornwood. Surely you have noticed by now." He stepped closer, and Arabella resisted the urge to step back. Retreat only encouraged him. "I had hoped we might have a moment to speak privately. There is a small parlour just down the corridor that should suit admirably. I am afraid Lady Whitmore requires me." "Lady Whitmore can spare you for a quarter hour. Indeed, I rather think she must, given how much she depends upon my good will for her continued social standing. It would be a pity if certain rumours began to circulate about her household. The presence of a disgraced companion, for instance. These things have a way of spreading." The threat was casual, almost friendly, delivered with the ease of a man who had made so many similar threats that they came as naturally as breathing. Arabella felt the familiar helpless rage rising in her chest, the fury at being cornered, at having no power to fight back, at being forced to dance to this man's tune simply because he held all the cards and she held none. "Very well," she said quietly. "A quarter hour." Sir Marcus's smile widened. "Excellent. I knew you would see reason. He led her through the ballroom with a proprietary hand at the small of her back, nodding to acquaintances as they passed, playing the role of a gentleman escorting a lady with perfect social grace. No one who saw them would suspect anything amiss. No one would think to intervene on behalf of a paid companion who had no family, no protectors, nothing to recommend her but a faded bloodline and a reputation for surviving. The parlour was small and overwarm, a fire burning unnecessarily in the grate despite the humid summer evening. Sir Marcus closed the door behind them with a soft click that made Arabella's skin crawl. "Now then," he said, turning to face her with that terrible smile still in place. "I believe it is time we concluded our long negotiation, Miss Thornwood." "There is nothing to conclude, Sir Marcus. I have given you my answer many times, and I have chosen not to accept it." He moved toward her, and this time Arabella did step back, her hip colliding with a small writing desk. "You are a practical woman. I have always admired that about you. So let us speak practically. Your father's debts. The debts I was kind enough to purchase from his original creditors amount to nearly £7,000. Your brother's education at Cambridge costs £200 per year. Your own salary as Lady Whitmore's companion is £40 per annum, of which I suspect you send at least half to young Oliver. At your current rate of repayment, you will clear your family's debts in approximately 175 years. The numbers were familiar. She had calculated them herself, countless times, searching desperately for some combination that would yield a different result. There was none. "I am aware of my circumstances," she said. "Then you must also be aware that my patience is not infinite." Sir Marcus was close now. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and vaguely floral that would forever after make her feel sick. "I have been generous with you, Arabella. I have given you time to come to terms with your situation. I have allowed you to maintain the pretense of independence. But 3 years is long enough. I want an answer, and I want it tonight." The answer is the same as it has always been. No. Something flickered in Sir Marcus's eyes, a flash of the anger he usually kept so carefully hidden beneath his veneer of civilization. "You would refuse me? A man who could give you everything: comfort, security, a return to society? You would choose poverty and drudgery over marriage to me?" "Marriage?" Arabella heard the bitterness in her own voice and could not contain it. "Is that what you call it? I call it purchase. You do not want a wife, Sir Marcus. You want a possession, something you have pursued and acquired, like a painting or a horse, something that belongs to you utterly, with no will of its own. And what is wrong with that?" His hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "You belong to me already, Arabella. Every pound your father owed, every farthing I have spent on your brother's precious education, it all belongs to me. You are simply too proud to acknowledge it. Let go of me." "Or what? You will scream? Create a scandal?" He laughed softly. "No, you won't, because you know exactly what would happen. Lady Whitmore would dismiss you. Your brother would be expelled from Cambridge. I have friends on the board, you know, friends who owe me favours. Every door in London would close against you, and you would have no choice left but to come to me anyway. Only then I would be considerably less generous in my terms." Arabella's mind raced, searching for escape, finding none. He was right. He was always right. He had spent 3 years building this cage around her, and every bar was forged from her own vulnerabilities, her own desperate need to protect Oliver, to salvage something from the wreckage of their family. 2 weeks, Sir Marcus said, his grip loosening slightly now that he saw her capitulation forming. "That is all the time I will give you. Consider your answer carefully, Arabella. And remember, there is no escape from me. There never has been." A sound from the corridor voices, laughter, the click of heels on marble. Sir Marcus released her arm and stepped back, smoothing his coat with practised ease. 2 weeks, he repeated, I will expect your answer at the Morrison ball, and it will be yes." He turned toward the door, reaching for the handle, and Arabella saw her chance. While his back was turned, while his attention was focused on the sound of approaching guests, she moved. 3 quick steps took her to the servants' entrance she had noticed in the corner of the room, a door disguised to match the wallpaper, nearly invisible unless one knew to look for it. She was through it, and into the service corridor before Sir Marcus had time to react. Arabella ran. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond the desperate need to put distance between herself and the monster in the parlour. The service corridors of Lord Pemberton's townhouse were a maze of narrow passages and cramped staircases, designed to keep servants invisible as they moved through the house. Arabella plunged through them blindly, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she could hear Sir Marcus's voice, sharp with anger, demanding that servants tell him which way she had gone. They would tell him, of course they would tell him. He was Sir Marcus Blackwell, a man of wealth and influence, and she was no one, a disgraced companion fleeing through the darkness like a criminal. She turned a corner, then another, losing herself in the labyrinth. The corridors grew darker as she moved farther from the public rooms, lit only by occasional candles in wall sconces. Her foot caught on an uneven flagstone, and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall, her palms scraping against rough plaster. "Think," she commanded herself. "Think." But panic had her in its grip, and thought was impossible. All she knew was that she could not go back. She could not face Sir Marcus again, could not endure another moment of his smiling certainty that she was already his. 2 weeks, he had said. 2 weeks until he demanded his answer, and they both knew what that answer would have to be. Unless she ran, unless she disappeared, took Oliver, fled to the continent or America or some distant colony where Sir Marcus's reach could not extend. But that was fantasy. She had no money, no connections, nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce, useless determination to survive. Running would only delay the inevitable, and it would destroy Oliver's future as surely as submission would destroy her soul. There was no escape. Sir Marcus had told her so himself, and he was right. Arabella pressed her hand against her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to break free. She would not cry. She had not cried in 3 years. Not when her father died, not when the creditors came, not when her mother wasted away from shame and heartbreak. She would not start now, cowering in a service corridor like a frightened child. But God, she was so tired, so desperately, bone-deep tired of fighting a battle she could never win. A door appeared ahead of her, slightly ajar, spilling a thin line of golden light into the corridor. Arabella moved toward it without thinking, drawn by some instinct she could not name. The light suggested warmth, safety, a place to hide while she gathered the fragments of her composure. She pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room was a study, small, masculine, lined with books and furnished with heavy leather chairs. A fire burned low in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The curtains were drawn against the night, thick velvet in a shade of deep burgundy that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. For one blessed moment, Arabella thought she was alone. Then a figure rose from one of the chairs, and her heart stopped. He had been sitting in shadow, invisible in the darkness beyond the fire's reach, and now he stepped forward into the light with the unhurried grace of a man who owned whatever space he occupied. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke to physical power held carefully in check. His hair was dark, nearly black, worn longer than fashion dictated, falling across a face that would have been beautiful if not for its absolute lack of warmth. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. And eyes. God, those eyes. They were grey, the colour of storm clouds over the sea, and they fixed upon Arabella with an intensity that made her feel as though she had been stripped bare. She knew him. Everyone in London knew him, by reputation, if not by sight. Sebastian Ashworth, the Duke of Thornfield. The Granite Duke, they called him, a man whose heart was rumoured to be made of stone. He had not attended a social event in years, had not shown interest in any woman since his wife died, had retreated behind walls of cold indifference that no one had been able to breach. And Arabella had just burst into his private sanctuary, her hair dishevelled, her breath ragged, her eyes wild with barely contained terror. I beg your pardon," she stammered. "I didn't realize anyone was... I should go." She turned toward the door, but even as she reached for the handle, she heard it. Sir Marcus's voice, echoing down the corridor, growing closer with every passing second. "Must be here somewhere. Check every room if you have to. I will not have her slipping away from me again." Arabella's hand froze on the handle. For one terrible moment, she stood paralyzed between two impossible choices, the monster in the corridor or the stranger in the shadows. Then she turned back to face the Duke of Thornfield, and the words came without thought, without pride, without anything but raw desperation. "Hide me, please. I beg you." Something flickered in those storm-grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity, or something she could not name. He did not move, did not speak, simply stood there regarding her with that unnerving intensity while Sir Marcus's footsteps grew ever closer. "Please," Arabella whispered again. "I have no right to ask, I know I have no right, but if there is any mercy in you at all." The Duke moved. One moment he was standing by the fire, motionless as the marble statue he resembled. The next he had crossed the room in 3 swift strides, seized Arabella by the arm, and pulled her toward the window. Heavy curtains concealed a deep alcove, and he pushed her into it without ceremony, pressing her back against the cold glass of the window. "Be silent," he breathed, and then he stepped in after her, pulling the curtains closed behind them. The alcove was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people, and Arabella found herself pressed against the Duke's chest with no room to retreat. She could feel the heat of his body through the layers of his coat and waistcoat, could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat so close to her ear. He smelled of sandalwood and something darker, richer whiskey perhaps, or the smoke from the fire he had been sitting beside. Beyond the curtain, the study door opened. "Your Grace." Sir Marcus's voice, smooth and controlled, despite the frustration Arabella could hear beneath the surface. "Forgive the intrusion. I am searching for a young lady who seems to have lost her way. She is small, brown hair, wearing a grey gown. Have you by any chance seen her?" The Duke's arm tightened around Arabella's waist, a warning, she thought, to remain still and silent. She pressed her hand against her mouth, scarcely daring to breathe. "I have seen no one." The Duke's voice was deep, cold, utterly devoid of inflection. "I came here specifically to avoid company. I would appreciate it if you would respect that desire and take your search elsewhere." A pause. Arabella could picture Sir Marcus's face, that calculating expression he wore when assessing a situation, deciding whether to push or retreat. "Of course, Your Grace. My apologies for the disturbance." Footsteps crossed the floor, and the study door closed with a soft click. Arabella slumped with relief, her forehead coming to rest against the Duke's shoulder. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She could feel the tension in his body, coiled and controlled, and she was suddenly acutely aware of how improper their position was, alone in a dark alcove, pressed together like lovers. Her reputation already in tatters, and now destroyed beyond any hope of salvage if they were discovered. The Duke did not release her. "He is gone," Arabella whispered. "I should... wait." His voice was barely audible, his breath warm against her hair. "He may return." So they stood there, concealed by velvet curtains, while the candles burned lower and the fire crackled softly in the grate. Arabella became aware of small details, the fine wool of his coat beneath her fingers, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his hand rested at the small of her back with a gentleness that surprised her. This close, she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that suggested he was thinking deeply about something. What was he thinking about? Her, presumably. The mad woman who had burst into his study and begged him to hide her. What must he think of her? But when she risked a glance at his face, she found no judgment there, only that same intense, assessing gaze, as though she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. After what felt like an eternity, the Duke released her and stepped out of the alcove. He held the curtain aside for her, and Arabella emerged on unsteady legs, her cheeks flushed with a heat she could not entirely attribute to the closeness of their hiding place. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. I don't know how to. That will cost you." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Arabella stared at him, her gratitude curdling into something colder. Of course, she should have known. Nothing in this world came without a price, least of all the assistance of a powerful man. She had escaped Sir Marcus only to fall into the hands of another predator, one whose reputation for coldness did nothing to reassure her about his intentions. "I see." She heard the bitterness in her voice and made no effort to hide it. "And what is your price, Your Grace? What do you require in exchange for your moment of mercy?" The Duke's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or respect for her defiance. He moved away from her, crossing to a sideboard where crystal decanters gleamed in the firelight. "Before I name my price, I should like to know what I am purchasing." He poured 2 glasses of what appeared to be brandy and offered one to her. "Who are you? And why is Sir Marcus Blackwell hunting you through Lord Pemberton's house like a hound after a fox?" Arabella did not take the glass. "My name is Arabella Thornwood." Recognition dawned in his eyes. Baron Thornwood's daughter, the one who disappeared from society after his death. He set her untouched glass on the mantelpiece. "I remember hearing about the debts. They were substantial. £7,000. She saw no reason to hide the truth. He would discover it easily enough if he made inquiries. My father had difficulties. Gaming debts mostly, and some unwise investments. When he died, the creditors descended like vultures. Everything was sold: the house, the furnishings, my mother's jewellery. It still was not enough. And Sir Marcus? He purchased the debts from the original creditors, all of them. He has spent 3 years tightening his grip, waiting for me to accept his proposal of marriage." Arabella's hands clenched at her sides. "He does not want a wife. He wants a possession. Someone he has pursued and acquired, someone utterly in his power. And tonight he gave me his ultimatum. I have 2 weeks to accept him, or he will destroy what little remains of my family. Your brother, the one at Cambridge." She looked up sharply. "You know about Oliver?" "I know a great many things, Miss Thornwood. It is one of the advantages of being a duke. Information flows freely when one has the resources to pay for it." He sipped his brandy, watching her over the rim of the glass. "Your brother is 17, studying classics on a scholarship you secretly helped him obtain by writing his entrance essays. Sir Marcus has friends on the Cambridge board who would be happy to have him expelled at a word. Without your brother's education and future prospects, you would have nothing left to protect, nothing to prevent you from accepting Sir Marcus's generous offer." Arabella felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know all this?" "As I said, I know a great many things." He set down his glass and turned to face her fully, and Arabella was struck again by the sheer physical presence of him, the height, the breadth of shoulder, the coiled power that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a flame. But the relevant question is not what I know, it is what I want. Which is a wife. The word hung in the air between them, impossibly loud in the quiet room. Arabella stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me correctly." The Duke's expression remained utterly impassive. "I require a wife, Miss Thornwood, a temporary one to be precise. 6 months of marriage, after which you would be free to go with a substantial settlement that would ensure your independence for the rest of your life. In exchange, I would pay off your family's debts in their entirety, guarantee your brother's education and future prospects, and provide you with the protection of my name for as long as you bear it." "I don't understand." Arabella's mind was reeling, unable to make sense of what she was hearing. "You are the Duke of Thornfield. You could have any woman in England. Why would you want to marry someone like me?" "Because I don't want any woman in England. I want a woman who will ask no questions, expect no affection, and leave when our arrangement is concluded without making difficulties." He moved closer, and Arabella had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You are desperate enough to accept such terms, and practical enough to honor them. Those are precisely the qualities I require." "But why? What could possibly—" "My grandmother is dying." The words were flat, emotionless, but Arabella saw something flash across his face there, and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Pain, grief, love perhaps, though she would not have thought him capable of such a thing. "The Dowager Duchess has weeks to live, perhaps a month. Her final wish is to see me married, to know that the line will continue. She has given me everything, her guidance, her protection, her unconditional love, when I deserved none of it. I cannot bring myself to deny her this comfort in her final days." His jaw tightened. "But I have no intention of binding myself permanently to anyone. I did that once, and I will not do it again." "Your first wife." Arabella spoke without thinking. "I heard she died in childbirth." "Yes." A single word, cold as winter ice. "Eleanor died, and the child with her. I have no desire to discuss it." "Then why marry again at all? Surely your grandmother would understand." "She would understand, and she would forgive, and she would spend her final weeks worried about me rather than at peace." For the first time, emotion crept into his voice. Frustration, or perhaps desperation of his own. "I will not do that to her. She deserves better. She deserves to die believing I am happy, even if it is a lie." Arabella was silent for a long moment, absorbing all of this. It was madness. The entire proposition was madness. She had fled from one arranged marriage only to be offered another, this one by a man she had known for less than an hour, a man whose reputation for coldness was matched only by his reputation for never breaking his word. And yet, what exactly would this arrangement entail? She heard herself ask. The Duke's eyes sharpened. "We would marry by special license within the week. You would move into my household and play the role of a devoted wife, attending events with me, visiting my grandmother, maintaining the appearance of a genuine union. Our chambers would be separate, and I would make no demands upon your person. After 6 months, we would separate quietly, an incompatibility, a mutual agreement, whatever story you prefer. You would receive a settlement of £10,000, a house in a location of your choosing, and a yearly allowance sufficient to maintain your independence." £10,000. The number was so large it seemed almost unreal. With £10,000 she could provide for Oliver for the rest of his life. She could establish herself in a quiet country town, live modestly but comfortably, never again be at the mercy of men like Sir Marcus. But at what cost? "And if I refuse?" The Duke shrugged. a slight movement of those broad shoulders. "Then you walk out of this room and face Sir Marcus on your own. I have no intention of forcing you, Miss Thornwood. I am making you an offer, not issuing an ultimatum. The choice is entirely yours." It was not much of a choice, and they both knew it. Sir Marcus was waiting for her somewhere in this house, his patience exhausted, his determination renewed. In 2 weeks he would demand her answer, and she would have no option but to give him the one he wanted, unless she accepted the Duke's proposal. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow morning." He moved past her, opening the study door and glancing into the corridor beyond. "Blackwell has gone. You should be able to return to Lady Whitmore without incident. I will send a carriage for you at 10 o'clock. If you are not in it, I will take that as your answer." Arabella paused in the doorway, looking back at him. In the firelight, his face was all angles and shadows, impossible to read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Truly?" For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then, so quietly she might have imagined it, "Because you looked at me as though I might be capable of kindness. No one has looked at me that way in a very long time." Before she could respond, he turned away, dismissing her as completely as if she had ceased to exist. Arabella stood there for a moment longer, her thoughts in chaos, her heart pounding with something that was not quite fear and not quite hope. Then she slipped into the corridor and made her way back to Lady Whitmore, her mind already racing toward the impossible choice that awaited her. The rain began as Arabella helped Lady Whitmore into her carriage, fat drops spattering against the cobblestones and drumming on the roof of the vehicle. Lady Whitmore, wrapped in shawls and pleasantly fatigued from an evening of gossip and observation, dozed off almost immediately, leaving Arabella alone with her thoughts. The carriage swayed through the darkened streets, and Arabella pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window, watching London slide past in a blur of shadows and lamplight. Her mind kept returning to the study, to the Duke's face in the firelight, to the impossible proposition he had laid before her. A temporary marriage. 6 months of pretending to be something she was not, a duchess, a woman of consequence, a wife. And then freedom, true freedom, the kind she had dreamed of in the darkest hours of the night when Sir Marcus's threats echoed in her ears. It was too good to be true. Nothing in her life had ever been too good to be true. Why should this be any different? There had to be a catch, some hidden cost she was not seeing. The Duke of Thornfield had a reputation for coldness. Yes, but also for ruthlessness. He did not make bargains that did not benefit him. He did not extend charity to desperate women. And yet, he had hidden her. Without hesitation, without negotiation, he had pulled her into that alcove and lied to Sir Marcus without a moment's pause. Whatever else he was, he had protected her when he had no reason to do so. But could she trust him? Could she bind herself to a stranger, even temporarily, on the strength of a single moment of kindness? The alternative was Sir Marcus. That was the truth Arabella could not escape, no matter how she tried to rationalize her way around it. She could refuse the Duke's offer and walk straight into Sir Marcus's arms. She could spend 2 weeks pretending that something might change, that some miracle might save her, and then surrender everything she was to a man who would destroy her by inches. Or she could take a gamble on a stranger. When the carriage deposited her at Lady Whitmore's townhouse, Arabella was no closer to a decision. She helped her employer to bed, performed her nightly duties with mechanical efficiency, and retreated at last to her own small room in the servants' quarters. It was not much of a room, a narrow bed, a washstand, a small window that looked out on the Mews. But it was hers, the only space in the world that belonged to her, and Arabella sank onto the bed with a weariness that went bone deep. On the nightstand sat a miniature portrait, her mother, painted in happier times, before poverty and heartbreak had stolen the light from her eyes. Arabella picked it up, tracing the familiar lines of that beloved face. "What should I do, Mamma?" she whispered. "What would you have me do?" But her mother had no answers. Her mother had died believing that love was worth any sacrifice, that family was everything, that hope could triumph over despair. Her mother had been wrong. Arabella set the portrait down and rose to stand by the window. The rain had intensified, sheets of water cascading down the glass, and she watched it for a long time, thinking of nothing and everything. The Duke of Thornfield was offering her a way out. Not an ideal way. Nothing about her situation was ideal, but a way nonetheless. She would have to deceive an old woman who was dying, pretend emotions she did not feel, bind herself to a man she did not know. But at the end of it, she would be free. Oliver would be safe, and she would never have to endure Sir Marcus's touch, his smile, his terrible patient certainty that she was already his. Was that not worth 6 months of her life? When dawn began to lighten the sky, Arabella sat down at her small writing desk and took out a sheet of paper. Her hand trembled as she dipped her pen in the ink, but her resolve did not waver. "Your Grace," she wrote, "I accept your terms. Miss Arabella Thornwood." She sealed the letter with a drop of wax and placed it on her nightstand. In a few hours the Duke's carriage would arrive, and she would step into it, and her life would change forever. For better or worse, she had made her choice. The carriage arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, as promised. Arabella had spent the morning in a daze of activity, informing Lady Whitmore of her departure with a hastily invented story about a family emergency, packing her few belongings into a battered trunk, writing a letter to Oliver that said nothing of what was truly happening. By the time the Duke's footman knocked at the servants' entrance, she felt as though she were watching herself from a great distance, a spectator in her own life. The carriage was magnificent black lacquered wood, with silver fittings, drawn by a matched pair of grey horses that looked as though they had cost more than Arabella would earn in a lifetime. The footman handed her inside with impersonal courtesy, and she found herself alone on velvet cushions, her worn trunk stowed somewhere beneath her feet. They drove through the morning streets of London, and Arabella watched the familiar landmarks slide past with a strange sense of unreality. She had walked these streets 1,000 times in her old life, when she had been Baron Thornwood's daughter, when she had attended balls and musicales and garden parties, when she had never imagined that poverty and desperation would become her constant companions. Now she was returning to that world, or a version of it, as the future Duchess of Thornfield. The carriage stopped before a townhouse in Mayfair, and Arabella's breath caught in her throat. She had seen Thornfield House before. Of course everyone had seen it, that imposing facade of white stone and tall windows that dominated the street like a fortress. But she had never imagined she would enter it, let alone as its mistress. The footman opened the carriage door and offered his hand. Arabella took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and stepped out onto the pavement. The Duke was waiting for her in the entrance hall, standing before a fire that blazed in an enormous marble fireplace. In the morning light, he was even more imposing than he had seemed the night before, taller, broader, his face a mask of aristocratic reserve that gave nothing away. "Miss Thornwood." He did not smile, did not offer any gesture of welcome. "You came." "I said I would." "Yes, you did." He studied her for a long moment, and Arabella felt that assessing gaze like a physical weight. "Come. There are matters we must discuss before we proceed." He led her through the house, a blur of gleaming floors and priceless paintings and furniture that probably cost more than her father's entire estate, to a study that was larger and grander than the one at Lord Pemberton's, but somehow felt equally intimate. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls lined with books and a massive desk covered in papers. The Duke gestured to a chair before the desk, and Arabella sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. First, the practical matters. He took a seat behind the desk and withdrew a sheaf of papers from a drawer. I have had my solicitor draw up a contract outlining the terms of our arrangement. You will find everything exactly as I described last night: the duration of the marriage, the separate chambers, the settlement you will receive upon our separation. I have also included provisions for your brother's education and a guarantee that all debts currently held by Sir Marcus Blackwell will be settled in full within the week. He slid the papers across the desk to her. Arabella picked them up and began to read, forcing herself to focus on the dense legal language despite the pounding of her heart. It was all there, exactly as he had promised. The marriage would last 6 months, beginning from the date of the ceremony. She would reside in Thornfield House as his wife in name and public appearance, but she would have complete privacy in her own chambers. Upon the conclusion of their arrangement, she would receive £10,000, a house of her choosing, and an annual allowance of £500 for the rest of her life. It was more than generous. It was almost absurdly so. And yet— "There is nothing here about what you expect from me," she said, looking up from the papers. "Beyond the public appearances, I mean. What exactly am I agreeing to do?" Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she had thought to ask. "You will play the role of my devoted wife. You will attend events with me when required, receive callers when necessary, and maintain the appearance of a happy marriage. Most importantly, you will spend time with my grandmother. She is the reason for this arrangement. Her comfort is paramount. And beyond that? Beyond that, your time is your own. You may read, walk in the gardens, pursue whatever activities please you. I ask only that you be discreet, and that you do nothing to embarrass me or cast doubt on the legitimacy of our union." It seemed too simple. There had to be more, there was always more, with men like him. "What if I fail?" Arabella asked. "What if I cannot convince your grandmother, or if someone discovers the truth? What happens to our arrangement then?" "If you fail, you will still receive your settlement, though perhaps reduced from the original amount." His voice was cool, matter-of-fact. "I do not punish people for honest effort, but I do not expect you to fail, Miss Thornwood. You are clever enough to have survived 3 years under Sir Marcus's persecution. You are certainly clever enough to play a convincing bride for 6 months. And if I wish to end the arrangement early, if I find I cannot, then you may leave whenever you choose." He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "I want to make something very clear, Miss Thornwood. This is a business arrangement, not a prison sentence. You are free to walk away at any time, for any reason. The only consequence would be a proportional reduction in your settlement based on the length of time you remained. I have no interest in keeping you against your will." Arabella stared at him, searching for the lie, the hidden cruelty. She found nothing but that same cold, measuring gaze. "Why?" she asked again, the question that had haunted her all night. "You could have any woman in England. You could hire an actress to play this role, someone with no connections to society, no risk of exposure. Why choose me, a disgraced baron's daughter with nothing to offer but desperation?" The Duke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, stripped of some of its cold formality. "Because you looked at me last night as though I might be human." He rose from behind the desk and moved to the window, his back to her. "Because when I pulled you into that alcove and told you to be silent, you trusted me. You had no reason to. I am a stranger, and not a kind one, but you trusted me anyway." "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Arabella said nothing. "I have spent 7 years building walls around myself, Miss Thornwood. 7 years convincing the world that I am made of stone, that I feel nothing, that I want nothing. And in 7 years, you are the first person who has looked at me and seen something other than the Granite Duke." He turned back to face her, and for just an instant she saw something raw and wounded in his eyes. "That is why I chose you, because you looked at me as though I might still be worth saving." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. "I am not looking to save anyone," Arabella said finally. "I have quite enough trouble saving myself." "I know." Something that might have been a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "That is why this arrangement will work. Neither of us is laboring under romantic delusions. We both know exactly what we are getting, and we both know it is only temporary. There will be no complications, no expectations, no disappointments." He returned to his desk and picked up a pen. "Now, if you have no further questions, I suggest we both sign this contract and make our arrangement official. The wedding will take place in 3 days. I have already obtained a special license. That should give us enough time to have suitable clothing made for you and to prepare you for your introduction to my grandmother." Arabella looked down at the contract in her hands. This was it, the moment of no return. Once she signed, she would be bound to this man, this stranger, this cold and wounded duke who claimed he wanted nothing from her but a performance. She thought of Sir Marcus, of his patient, predatory smile. She thought of Oliver, of his bright future that hung by a thread. She thought of her mother, dying of heartbreak in a rented room, and of her father, destroying everything he touched with his weakness and his lies. She picked up the pen and signed her name. The Duke signed beneath her, his signature bold and decisive, and just like that, it was done. "Welcome to Thornfield House, Miss Thornwood," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been satisfaction, or might have been something else entirely. "I believe this is the beginning of a very interesting partnership." Arabella looked up at him, this man who would be her husband in 3 days' time, and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it. The faintest whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, she had not simply traded one cage for another. "Perhaps it is," she said. And the rain, which had been threatening all morning, finally began to fall. The seamstresses descended like a flock of very efficient birds, armed with tape measures and fabric samples, and an endless stream of questions that Arabella could barely follow. Within hours of signing the contract, she found herself standing in a guest chamber that was larger than Lady Whitmore's entire apartment, being measured and pinned and discussed as though she were a particularly interesting piece of furniture that required reupholstering. "The wedding gown will be ivory silk," the head seamstress, a formidable woman named Madame Delacroix, declared, draping a length of fabric across Arabella's shoulder. "Simple, elegant, nothing too ostentatious. For the evening wear, we shall need at least 6 gowns to begin with, more as the season progresses. Day dresses, walking costumes, a riding habit." "I don't ride," Arabella interrupted. Madame Delacroix fixed her with a look that suggested this was an entirely unacceptable state of affairs. "You are to be the Duchess of Thornfield. You will learn." The afternoon passed in a blur of fabrics and fittings, and by the time the seamstresses finally departed, Arabella was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. She sank onto the edge of the bed, an enormous 4-poster draped in silk and velvet, and stared at the ceiling. What had she done? A knock at the door startled her upright. Before she could respond, it opened to reveal a young woman in a maid's uniform, carrying a tray laden with tea and small sandwiches. "His Grace thought you might be hungry, miss," the maid said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "I'm to be your lady's maid once you're married. My name is Hannah. Is there anything else you need?" Arabella shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. Hannah bobbed a curtsy and slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. The tea was hot and fragrant, the sandwiches delicate and perfectly prepared. Arabella ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind whirling with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been a paid companion with no future and no hope. Today, She was 3 days away from becoming a duchess. The absurdity of it threatened to overwhelm her. She set down her teacup and pressed her hands against her eyes, willing herself to remain calm. "This is what you wanted," she told herself. "This is survival. This is saving Oliver. This is escape." But even as she repeated the words, another part of her mind kept returning to the Duke's face in the firelight, to the raw pain she had glimpsed behind his mask, to the way he had looked at her as though she had done something extraordinary simply by seeing him as human. "I am not looking to save anyone," she had told him. But what if, despite herself, she was? A soft sound from the doorway made her look up. The Duke stood there, still in the dark coat he had worn that morning, his expression unreadable. "I did not mean to intrude," he said. "I merely wished to ensure you had everything you need." "I do. Thank you." He nodded, but did not leave. Instead, he stepped into the room, his gaze moving over the luxurious furnishings, as though seeing them for the first time. "This was my mother's room," he said quietly, "before she died. I thought you might find it comfortable." Arabella looked around with new eyes, seeing traces of feminine presence in the soft colors, the delicate furniture, the vase of fresh flowers on the windowsill. "It's beautiful. She would have liked you, I think." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her. She had a talent for seeing past surfaces to the truth beneath, much like you. Before Arabella could respond, he reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, a miniature portrait in a gold frame. He held it out to her, his hand perfectly steady. "This fell from my pocket last night. You saw it. I saw your face when you recognized what it was." Arabella took the portrait, looking down at the painted face of a young woman with gentle eyes and a soft smile. "Your wife." "Eleanor." His voice was flat. "She was 19 when we married, 20 when she died. I keep her portrait with me as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of what I am capable of destroying." He took the portrait back, tucking it carefully into his pocket. "I married Eleanor for advantage, Miss Thornwood, not for love. She was suitable, well-bred, well-dowried, well-connected. I thought those things were enough. I thought I could perform the role of husband without actually feeling anything for her." He moved to the window, looking out at the rain that continued to fall. She deserved better. She deserved someone who would love her, who would treasure her, who would be devastated by her loss. Instead, she got me a man who barely noticed her presence until she was gone, and who noticed her absence only because it inconvenienced him. That sounds very harsh. It is the truth. He turned back to face her, and his eyes were bleak. "I am not a good man, Miss Thornwood. I do not love easily, or well, or perhaps at all. Eleanor's death and the death of our child convinced me of that. Whatever capacity I might have had for tenderness, for genuine feeling, it died with them. All that remains is the shell you see before you." Arabella studied him for a long moment, seeing the pain he was trying so hard to conceal behind walls of ice. "I think," she said slowly, "that you believe what you are saying, but I do not think it is true." "No? A man who felt nothing would not carry his dead wife's portrait in his pocket. He would not arrange for his grandmother's comfort at the cost of his own freedom. He would not pull a stranger into an alcove to hide her from a predator with no expectation of reward." She met his eyes, unflinching. "You have convinced yourself that you are made of stone, Your Grace. But I think the truth is quite different. I think you feel far too much, and you have simply forgotten how to survive it." Silence fell between them. The Duke stared at her as though she had struck him, his composure cracking for just an instant before reforming into its usual impenetrable mask. You see a great deal, Miss Thornwood. I have learned to look closely. It is how one survives when one has no power. Another silence, longer this time. Then the Duke inclined his head in something that might have been acknowledgement or respect, or something else entirely. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will take you to meet my grandmother. She has been told of our engagement and is eager to make your acquaintance. I should warn you she is not easily deceived. If you cannot convince her that our attachment is genuine, our arrangement will fail. And if I can convince her, then you will have done something remarkable indeed." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Dinner is at 8. Hannah will help you dress. I will see you then, Miss Thornwood." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Arabella sat alone in the beautiful room that had belonged to his mother, thinking about men and masks, and the wounds we carry without knowing it. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets of London clean, preparing the world for whatever was to come. In 3 days, she would be married to a man she barely knew, a man who believed himself incapable of love, a man whose grandmother was dying and whose heart was locked behind walls of ice. And somehow, against all reason and all expectation, she found herself wanting to find the key. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield was not at all what Arabella had expected. She had imagined someone frail, diminished by illness, perhaps propped up on pillows and speaking in whispers. Instead, the woman who received her in the morning room of Thornfield House sat bolt upright in a wing-back chair, her silver hair arranged in an elegant chignon, her dark eyes, so like her grandson's, sharp and assessing. She wore a gown of deep purple silk that would have been fashionable 30 years ago, and carried off with an authority that made fashion irrelevant. "So," Lady Helena said, after studying Arabella for a long, uncomfortable moment, "you are the woman who has captured my grandson's heart." The words were a test. Arabella could feel it. She resisted the urge to glance at Sebastian, who stood by the fireplace with his usual expression of careful neutrality. "I am not certain I would phrase it quite that way, Your Grace," Arabella said carefully, "but I am honoured to make your acquaintance." Lady Helena's eyebrows rose. "Not certain? How curious. Most young ladies in your position would be proclaiming their undying devotion from the rooftops. Sebastian, leave us." It was not a request. The Duke hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Arabella to see something that might have been concern flicker across his face, before inclining his head and withdrawing. The door closed behind him with a soft click. "Sit down, child." Lady Helena gestured to a chair across from her own. "I am too old for standing on ceremony, and my neck aches from looking up at you." Arabella sat, folding her hands in her lap, and trying not to feel like a specimen under examination. "Now then." Lady Helena leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "I have known my grandson for 32 years. I have watched him grow from a laughing, affectionate child into the cold, distant man you see today. I have watched him build walls around himself so high and so thick that no one, not family, not friends, not the unfortunate woman he married, has been able to breach them. And yet, here you are." "Here I am," Arabella agreed, not knowing what else to say. "He told me about you, you know, this morning before you came down. He said you were practical, intelligent, and entirely unsuitable for a duchess." A small smile curved Lady Helena's thin lips. "He also said he had never met anyone quite like you. From Sebastian, that is practically a declaration of love." Arabella felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Your Grace." "Do not Your Grace me, child. I am dying. Yes, I know it. There is no need to look so stricken, and I have no time for formalities. I want to know the truth. Do you care for my grandson, or is this merely an arrangement of convenience?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp-edged and unavoidable. Arabella thought of the contract she had signed, of the careful terms they had negotiated, of the walls they had both agreed to maintain. And then she thought of the portrait Sebastian carried in his pocket, of the pain in his eyes when he spoke of Eleanor, of the way he had pulled her into that alcove without hesitation, his body between her and danger, his lie flowing smooth and easy to protect a woman he had never met. "I think," Arabella said slowly, "that I am only beginning to know him. But what I have seen, I believe there is a good man beneath the ice, Your Grace. A man who has been wounded deeply and has forgotten how to heal. Whether I truly care for him, I cannot say. It is too soon. But I find myself wanting to know him better. I find myself wanting to understand him. And I find myself hoping that I might be of some use to him in whatever time we have together." It was more truth than she had intended to speak, more truth, perhaps, than she had admitted even to herself. But Lady Helena's eyes demanded honesty, and Arabella found she could not offer anything less. The Dowager Duchess studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she smiled a real smile, warm and almost mischievous. "Yes," she said softly, "you will do very well indeed." Before Arabella could respond, Lady Helena reached out and took her hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so close to death. "My grandson believes he is incapable of love, my dear. He has believed it since Eleanor died. It is the greatest lie he has ever told himself." Her dark eyes held Arabella's, fierce and urgent. "I need to know, are you brave enough to prove him wrong?" Arabella thought of her own walls, built over 3 years of survival. She thought of the armor she wore, the determination never to need anyone, never to trust anyone, never to let anyone close enough to hurt her. She thought of how much she had in common with the man she was about to marry. "I will try," she whispered, not knowing if it was a lie or a promise. Lady Helena squeezed her hand once, then released it. "That is all I ask. Now ring for tea, child. I want to hear everything about yourself, and I refuse to conduct interrogations without refreshments." The wedding took place 3 days later in the private chapel at Thornfield House, attended only by the necessary witnesses and Lady Helena, who insisted on being carried downstairs in a sedan chair rather than miss the ceremony. Arabella wore the ivory silk gown Madame Delacroix had promised, simple and elegant, with a wreath of white roses in her hair. She walked down the short aisle on legs that felt strangely unsteady, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar. Sebastian wore black, as always, but his coat was new, perfectly tailored, and his cravat was tied with unusual care. In the candlelight of the chapel, he looked almost handsome, or would have, if not for the rigid set of his jaw and the careful blankness of his expression. The vicar spoke the words of the ceremony, ancient and solemn, and Arabella repeated them with a voice that did not quite tremble. She promised to love, honor, and obey a man she barely knew, a man who had made it clear he expected none of those things from her. And yet, when Sebastian slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band, warm from his pocket, something shifted in her chest. This was real. Whatever their private understanding, whatever the contract hidden away in his study, in the eyes of God and the law, she was now his wife. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar said. Sebastian leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a brief, chaste gesture that somehow felt more intimate than any passionate embrace. When he pulled back, his eyes met hers, and for just a moment she saw something vulnerable behind his careful mask. "It is done," he said quietly. "Yes," Arabella replied. "It is." Lady Helena wept with joy throughout the small breakfast that followed. Clinging to Arabella's hand and calling her granddaughter with such obvious delight that Arabella felt a pang of guilt for the deception they were practicing. But when she caught Sebastian watching his grandmother's happiness, when she saw the softness in his eyes that he thought he was hiding, the guilt faded into something more complicated. He loved the old woman. Whatever else he believed about himself, whatever walls he had built, he loved his grandmother with a depth and tenderness that belied his claims of being made of stone. Perhaps Lady Helena was right. Perhaps the granite duke was not so granite after all. Their wedding night was nothing like the whispered warnings Arabella had received from well-meaning matrons over the years. There was no awkward undressing, no fumbling in the darkness, no martial duty to be endured. Instead, Sebastian escorted her to the door of her chamber, the room that had belonged to his mother, and paused with his hand on the handle. "I meant what I said in our contract," he told her, his voice low. "I will make no demands upon you. Your privacy is your own. I know. If you need anything at all, you have only to ask. Hannah will attend you, but the household staff have been instructed to treat your requests as they would my own. Thank you." He stood there for a moment longer, as though there was something else he wanted to say. In the dim light of the corridor, with the sounds of the household settling around them, he seemed almost uncertain, a far cry from the cold, commanding duke she had first encountered in Lord Pemberton's study. "Good night, Arabella," he said finally, and the sound of her Christian name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Good night, Sebastian." He inclined his head and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor until they faded into silence. Arabella entered her chamber alone and stood for a long moment in the darkness, her new wedding ring heavy on her finger, her heart beating with something that was not quite fear and not quite anticipation. She was married. She was a duchess. And she had 6 months to play her role before she could reclaim the independence she had bargained for. 6 months, she told herself as she prepared for bed. It was not so very long. She could manage 6 months of pretense, 6 months of careful performance, 6 months of keeping her heart safely locked away. She was still telling herself this as she fell asleep, her hand curled around the unfamiliar weight of the ring on her finger. The first weeks of her marriage passed in a blur of activity. There were calls to receive and return, introductions to be made, a dizzying array of social obligations that came with being the new Duchess of Thornfield. Arabella discovered that the Ton, which had looked down upon her as a disgraced companion, was suddenly eager to claim acquaintance with her now that she bore one of the most prestigious titles in England. The hypocrisy would have been infuriating if she had allowed herself to feel it. Instead, she smiled and nodded and played her role with the same determination she had once applied to survival. Sebastian, for his part, proved to be an unexpectedly attentive husband, at least in public. He escorted her to events with punctilious courtesy, introduced her to his acquaintances with every appearance of pride, and deflected impertinent questions about their whirlwind courtship with smooth, practiced ease. "We met at a house party in the country," he told one particularly nosy matron. "I was captivated immediately. It simply took some time to convince Miss Thornwood, forgive me, her grace, that my intentions were sincere." Arabella had smiled and blushed on cue, playing the part of a woman overwhelmed by her good fortune. But afterward, in the carriage returning home, she had turned to Sebastian with a raised eyebrow. "A house party? I don't believe I've attended a house party in 3 years." "Nor have I," he replied, "which makes it the perfect alibi. No one can contradict a story they cannot verify." It was clever, of course it was clever. Sebastian was nothing if not strategic. But there was something else beneath the calculation, something that looked almost like amusement at their shared conspiracy. They were developing a rapport, she realized. Not friendship. Exactly, their interactions remained too careful, too bounded by the terms of their agreement for that. But there was an ease between them now that had not existed in those first awkward days, a rhythm of give and take that felt almost natural. She found herself looking forward to their conversations. She found herself noticing small details about him, the way he rubbed his temple when he was tired, the way his voice softened when he spoke of his grandmother, the way his eyes lit up when he discussed his estates or the reforms he hoped to implement in Parliament. The Granite Duke, she was discovering, had depths he did not advertise. Behind the cold facade was a man who cared deeply about his responsibilities, who read voraciously on subjects ranging from agricultural improvement to classical philosophy, who played chess with a fierce competitive streak that emerged only when he thought no one was watching. She found herself wanting to know more. She found herself watching for those moments when his mask slipped, when the man beneath emerged, if only briefly, into view. It was dangerous, this growing fascination. She knew it was dangerous. Their arrangement was temporary, their relationship purely transactional. She could not afford to develop feelings for a man who had made it clear he had none to give in return. And yet, despite her best intentions, she felt herself beginning to care. Lady Helena's health declined steadily as spring gave way to early summer. The Dowager Duchess, who had seemed so formidable on their first meeting, grew thinner and more fragile with each passing week. She tired easily now, spending most of her days in bed, her once sharp eyes dimmed by pain and the laudanum that eased it. Arabella spent hours at her bedside, reading aloud from novels and poetry, sharing stories of her childhood, listening to Lady Helena's reminiscences of a life fully lived. She learned about Sebastian's parents, his father stern and distant, his mother warm and gentle and dead too young. She learned about Sebastian's boyhood, when he had been bright and affectionate and full of laughter. She learned about Eleanor, the suitable bride chosen for Sebastian by his father, the gentle young woman who had loved her husband without reservation and received nothing but cold courtesy in return. "He did not mean to hurt her," Lady Helena said one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "He simply did not know how to love her. His father had taught him that sentiment was weakness, that duty was everything, that a man of his station must never allow his heart to rule his head. By the time Sebastian realized what he had lost, it was too late." "What happened?" Arabella asked, though she already knew the answer. "She died in childbed, as so many women do. The baby, a boy, died with her. Sebastian was at the House of Lords when it happened. He did not even know she was in labor until it was over." Lady Helena's eyes filled with tears. "He came home to an empty nursery, and a wife who had died calling his name. He has never forgiven himself." Arabella felt her own eyes sting with sympathetic grief. "He told me he was not capable of love, that whatever capacity he might have had for tenderness died with Eleanor." "That is what he believes, but it is not true." Lady Helena reached out to clasp Arabella's hand with surprising strength. "I have watched him with you, child. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The way he speaks of you when you are not in the room. He is changing slowly, reluctantly, but changing nonetheless. You have reached him in ways I had begun to despair anyone could." "I am not trying to reach him," Arabella protested. "Our arrangement—" "I know about your arrangement." Lady Helena's smile was knowing, almost mischievous. "Did you think I would not? I am old, my dear, not stupid. I know my grandson made a bargain with you, and I know the terms of that bargain are entirely transactional. What I am telling you is that the bargain has become something more for both of you, whether you are willing to admit it or not." Arabella opened her mouth to argue, to protest, to insist that her feelings for Sebastian were purely practical. But the words would not come. Because deep down, in the part of herself she had tried so hard to protect, she knew Lady Helena was right. She was falling in love with her husband. Against all reason, against all intention, against every wall she had built around her heart, she was falling in love with the Granite Duke, and she had no idea what to do about it. The Morrison Ball was the event of the summer season, a glittering affair at one of London's grandest houses, attended by everyone who was anyone in society. Arabella and Sebastian arrived together, she in a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, he in his customary black evening attire that made him look even more imposing than usual. They made their entrance arm in arm, and Arabella felt the familiar weight of hundreds of eyes upon them. The granite duke and his unexpected bride still the subject of endless speculation weeks after their wedding. She had learned to ignore the whispers, the curious glances, the barely concealed envy of young ladies who had hoped to catch Sebastian's eye themselves. What she had not learned to ignore was the way her pulse quickened when Sebastian's hand tightened on her arm, or the warmth that spread through her when he leaned down to murmur something for her ears alone. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, and there was something in his voice that went beyond mere courtesy. "Thank you," she managed, hoping her blush could be attributed to the heat of the ballroom. They made their way through the crush of guests, stopping to greet acquaintances and accept congratulations on their marriage. Arabella played her role with practiced ease, smiling and charming, and giving every appearance of a woman deliriously happy in her new circumstances. It was getting harder to remember that it was only an act. Halfway through the evening, Sebastian was pulled away by a political associate who wished to discuss some matter of parliamentary business. Arabella assured him she would be fine on her own, and he departed with obvious reluctance, promising to return as quickly as possible. She was making her way toward the refreshment table when she felt that familiar prickling at the back of her neck. She turned, already knowing what she would find. Sir Marcus Blackwell stood not 10 feet away, a glass of champagne in his hand, his pale eyes fixed upon her with an expression that made her blood run cold. "Duchess." He inclined his head in a mocking bow. "How delightful to see you again. I must confess, I did not expect you to rise so high in the world. A duke, no less. You have exceeded even my expectations." "Sir Marcus," she kept her voice steady through sheer force of will, "I have nothing to say to you." "No, but I have a great deal to say to you." He moved closer, lowering his voice to an intimate murmur that would have seemed friendly to any observers. "Did you think marrying Thornfield would protect you from me? Did you think I would simply accept defeat and walk away? My husband has paid all debts owed to you. Our business is concluded. The debts, yes. Your husband was quite thorough in that regard. I received payment in full within a week of your wedding." His smile widened, taking on a cruel edge. "But money was never really what I wanted, was it, Arabella? I wanted you. I still want you, and I do not give up easily." Fear coiled in Arabella's stomach, but she refused to let him see it. "Whatever you wanted, Sir Marcus, you cannot have. I am the Duchess of Thornfield now. I am under my husband's protection." "Protection?" He laughed softly. "Do you really believe the Granite Duke cares enough about you to protect you? I have made inquiries, Arabella. I know about your arrangement. A temporary marriage 6 months, was it? After which you will be conveniently discarded. How romantic." Arabella's heart stopped. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? The servants in great houses talk, my dear. They always talk. And what they say is that the Duke of Thornfield married you for his grandmother's sake, not his own. That your chambers are on opposite ends of the house. That your husband treats you with perfect courtesy and absolutely no affection." His smile was triumphant. "A marriage of convenience, nothing more. And once it is over, you will have no one to protect you. No one but me." "You are wrong." Arabella's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Whatever you think you know, I know that your marriage is a sham. I know that the Duke will tire of you eventually if he has not already, and I know that when he does, I will be waiting." Sir Marcus leaned closer, close enough that she could smell the champagne on his breath. 6 months, Arabella. That is all the time you have. Enjoy your borrowed title while you can. When it is gone, you will come crawling back to me, and I will be considerably less generous in my terms." He stepped back, still smiling, and raised his glass in a mocking toast. "Until then, Duchess." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as though the conversation had never happened. Arabella stood frozen, her mind racing. Sir Marcus knew. Somehow, despite all their precautions, he had discovered the truth about their arrangement. And if he knew, others might know as well. The scandal would be devastating not just for her, but for Sebastian, for Lady Helena, for everyone connected to the Thornfield name. She had to tell Sebastian. She had to warn him before Sir Marcus could use what he knew to destroy them both. But even as she searched the ballroom for her husband's tall figure, another thought intruded, a darker, more painful thought that she tried desperately to suppress. Sir Marcus was right. Their marriage was temporary. In 6 months less now she would be free, independent, alone. Sebastian would go back to his cold, solitary life, and she would go back to... what? A comfortable house in some quiet town, a yearly allowance, the freedom she had bargained for. It had seemed like such an appealing future when she signed the contract. It seemed considerably less appealing now. Arabella pressed her hand against her stomach, trying to calm the churning anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. She could not think about that now. She had to find Sebastian. She had to tell him about Sir Marcus's threats. She had to protect the man she was not supposed to love. She found him in a side parlour, deep in conversation with 2 other men she vaguely recognised as members of Parliament. He looked up at her entrance, and something in her expression must have alarmed him, because he immediately excused himself and crossed to her side. "What is it?" he asked, low and urgent. "What has happened?" "Not here." She glanced around at the curious faces watching them. "Is there somewhere private we can speak?" Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He took her arm and led her through a series of corridors until they reached a small library, empty and quiet, far from the noise of the ball. "Tell me," he said, closing the door behind them. Arabella told him. She recounted her conversation with Sir Marcus in full, sparing nothing, not his threats, not his knowledge of their arrangement, not the cold certainty in his voice when he promised to be waiting when their marriage ended. Sebastian listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. By the time she finished, his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and there was a muscle jumping in his jaw. "He will not touch you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will see him ruined first." "Sebastian?" "I mean it, Arabella. I have resources, connections that he cannot begin to imagine. If he thinks he can threaten my wife with impunity, he is gravely mistaken." "My wife." The words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear, but this was not the time for such distractions. "He knows about our arrangement," she pressed. "If he tells anyone, let him tell them. Let him tell the whole of London." Sebastian moved closer, his eyes blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. "It will not matter. By the time he opens his mouth, our marriage will be unassailable." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we have been too careful, too distant, too obviously playing roles. The servants have noticed, of course they have noticed, and they have talked. If we want to protect ourselves from Sir Marcus and his accusations, we need to give the lie to every rumour he might spread." "How?" Sebastian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost uncertain. "By making our marriage real." Arabella's heart stopped. "Real?" "In appearance, at least. No more separate chambers. No more careful distance. We must be seen together constantly, obviously, undeniably devoted to one another. We must give society no reason to doubt that our marriage is anything other than what it appears to be." "But the contract—" "Damn the contract!" He stepped closer still, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, see the rapid pulse beating at his throat. "I did not anticipate, Sir Marcus. I did not anticipate any of this. I thought—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she had never seen before. "I thought I could keep you at arm's length. I thought I could maintain my walls while still playing the devoted husband. I was wrong." Sebastian. She did not know what she wanted to say. She did not know anything, except that he was closer than he had ever been. And his eyes were not cold at all, and her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I am not asking you to love me," he said quietly. "I know that was not part of our bargain. But I am asking you to trust me, to let me protect you, to let me stand between you and Sir Marcus and anything else that threatens you. Can you do that?" Trust him. After 3 years of trusting no one, of relying only on herself, of keeping everyone at a careful distance, could she really let down her guard now? Could she really allow herself to depend on another person? She looked at him, this cold, wounded, complicated man who had saved her without reason and married her without love, and who was now offering to fight for her with a fierceness that took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered, "I can do that." Something shifted in his expression, relief, perhaps, or gratitude, or something she did not dare name. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Then we will face him together, and he will not win." True to his word, Sebastian announced the very next morning that Arabella's chambers would be moved to the rooms adjoining his own. The servants exchanged knowing glances, and by noon, half of London had heard that the Granite Duke had requested that his wife's belongings be moved closer to his own apartments. Arabella watched the flurry of activity with a mixture of anxiety and something that felt dangerously like hope. Their new proximity was a strategy, nothing more a way of presenting a united front against Sir Marcus and the rumours he might spread. But when Hannah opened the connecting door between Arabella's new chamber and Sebastian's dressing room, revealing a glimpse of his private space beyond, Arabella felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. This was real. Whatever they pretended to the world, whatever convenient fictions they told themselves, this was becoming real in ways she had not anticipated and was not prepared for. Sebastian found her that evening in the small sitting room attached to her new chambers, staring at the connecting door as though it might bite her. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with an expression that might have been amusement. "No," she said quickly. This is all happening very fast. It needs to happen fast. Sir Marcus is not the patient type. If we give him time to prepare his campaign against us, he will have poisoned half of society before we can respond." I know you're right." She turned to face him, trying to compose her features into something approximating calm. "I simply need a moment to adjust." Sebastian was silent for a long moment, studying her with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to see far too much. "Arabella," he said finally, and the use of her name made her breath catch. "I need you to understand something. What I said last night about making our marriage real, I was speaking of appearances only. I have no intention of... That is, I would never..." He was blushing. The Granite Duke, the most cold and composed man in all of England, was actually blushing. It was so unexpected, so endearing, that Arabella felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to contain it, but Sebastian had already seen. "Are you laughing at me?" "No, yes, perhaps a little." She gave up trying to hide her smile. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I simply did not expect you to be so... flustered." "I am not flustered," he said with dignity. "I am merely attempting to be a gentleman. And doing admirably." She crossed to him, laying a hand on his arm. "Sebastian, I understand what you meant, and I appreciate your consideration. This situation is awkward enough without adding..." "Expectations," he supplied. "Expectations," she agreed. They stood there for a moment, her hand on his arm, his eyes on her face. The air between them felt charged, electric, full of things unspoken. "The door will remain locked," Sebastian said quietly. "Unless you choose otherwise." "I understand. And if you change your mind, if this becomes too uncomfortable, we will find another way." "I won't change my mind." She held his gaze, wanting him to see her certainty. "We are in this together, Sebastian. Whatever comes." Something flickered in his eyes, warmth, perhaps, or gratitude, or something deeper that made her heart skip a beat. He lifted his hand and very gently touched her cheek. "You are a remarkable woman, Arabella Thornfield." The sound of her married name on his lips, her real name now, for as long as their arrangement lasted, sent a shiver through her that she could not quite suppress. "I am a practical woman," she corrected. "That is all." "No." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, the touch feather-light and devastating. "That is not all. That is not nearly all." He dropped his hand and stepped back, the cool mask of the granite duke settling back into place. "Dinner will be served in an hour. I will see you then." He was gone before she could respond, leaving Arabella alone with her racing heart and the memory of his touch burning on her skin. The weeks that followed were a kind of exquisite torture. They appeared together everywhere: balls, dinners, the opera, the theatre. They rode in Hyde Park during the fashionable hour, Arabella on a gentle mare Sebastian had chosen specifically for her comfort. They attended garden parties and musicales, and endless rounds of social calls, always together, always touching, always presenting the image of perfect marital devotion. And slowly, inexorably, the image became the reality. It began with small things, a shared joke over breakfast, a meaningful glance across a crowded room, the way Sebastian's hand found the small of her back when they walked together. They developed private signals, a language of subtle gestures that allowed them to communicate without words. When Arabella was bored at a party, she would touch her ear. When Sebastian wanted to leave, he would squeeze her hand twice. They talked for hours in the evenings, long after the servants had gone to bed. Sebastian told her about his plans for his estates, his frustrations with Parliament, his secret love of poetry that he had never shared with anyone. Arabella told him about her childhood, her mother's death, the years of desperate survival that had taught her to trust no one. "I trusted no one," she corrected herself one night, sitting across from him in the library with a glass of sherry warming her hand. "Past tense. I hope I am learning to do better." Sebastian looked at her with an expression she had come to know well, that mix of wonder and uncertainty that appeared whenever she said something that surprised him. "What changed?" he asked. "You did." She held his gaze, willing him to understand. "You showed me that it was possible to be protected without being possessed, that a man could offer shelter without demanding payment, that I could accept help without surrendering my independence. That was our bargain." "No." She set down her glass and crossed to where he sat, kneeling beside his chair so she could look up into his face. "That was what you wrote in the contract. But what you gave me, what you have been giving me every day since we married, is something far more valuable than financial security. You gave me safety, Sebastian. You gave me space to breathe, to think, to become myself again. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" His hand came up to cup her face, and this time he did not pull away. "Arabella, I know our arrangement is temporary. I know that in a few months we will go our separate ways. But I need you to know before that happens that you have changed my life. Whatever else lies between us, that will always be true." Sebastian's eyes searched her face, looking for something she hoped he would find. "What if I don't want to go our separate ways?" Arabella's heart stopped. "What?" "What if I want to tear up the contract and start again?" His voice was rough, unsteady, nothing like the cold, controlled Duke she had first met. What if I want to keep you not as a temporary arrangement, but as my wife, my real wife? Sebastian, I know I said I was incapable of love. I know I told you not to expect affection or sentiment, but I was wrong, Arabella. I was so wrong. His thumb traced her cheekbone, her jaw, the corner of her mouth. You have done something to me, something I did not think possible. You have reached behind my walls and found the man I thought had died with Eleanor. And I... He broke off, the words seeming to catch in his throat. You what? Arabella whispered. I love you. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, rippling outward, changing everything. I love you, Arabella. I have been falling in love with you since the night you crashed into my hiding place and demanded that I save you, and I do not want to let you go. Arabella could not speak, could not think, could only kneel there, his hand on her face, his words echoing in her ears, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She should say something. She should respond, should tell him. But before she could find the words, a sharp knock at the library door shattered the moment. Your Grace. It was the butler, his voice strained. Forgive the intrusion, but there is a matter that requires your immediate attention. Sebastian's jaw tightened. It can wait. I'm afraid it cannot, Your Grace. Sir Marcus Blackwell is here. He says he has information about Her Grace that you will want to hear immediately. Sir Marcus was waiting in the entrance hall, a smug smile on his face and a sheaf of papers in his hand. Your Grace, he bowed with exaggerated courtesy. Forgive the late hour, but I thought you would want to see these before they become public knowledge. Sebastian's expression was murderous. Whatever game you are playing, Blackwell, I suggest you end it now. No game, I assure you, merely a public service. Sir Marcus held out the papers. Letters, Your Grace. Letters between you and your solicitor, discussing the terms of your marriage contract. Letters that make it abundantly clear that your union with the former Miss Thornwood was a business transaction, nothing more. Arabella felt the blood drain from her face. How had he obtained those letters? The solicitor was bound by confidentiality. I have copies, of course, Sir Marcus continued smoothly. Enough to share with every gossip columnist in London. By tomorrow evening, the whole world will know that the Granite Duke's great love story is nothing but a sham. You would destroy my wife's reputation out of spite? Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. Spite? No, Your Grace. This is merely business. Sir Marcus's smile widened. I want what I have always wanted. I want Arabella. Once your marriage is annulled, as it surely will be, once the circumstances become known, she will have no choice but to accept my protection, unless, of course, you would prefer to spare her the scandal. By doing what? By stepping aside, quietly, discreetly. Give her an annulment, a small settlement, and send her away. I will take care of the rest. Arabella had heard enough. She stepped forward, placing herself between Sebastian and Sir Marcus. Her chin lifted in defiance. No. Sir Marcus blinked. I beg your pardon? I said no. I will not go with you, Sir Marcus. Not now, not ever. I would rather be ruined publicly, completely, utterly ruined, than spend a single hour in your company. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Her voice was steady, clear, strong. I am the Duchess of Thornfield. I am the wife of a man I love. Yes, love, whatever your letters might suggest. And I will not be bartered or threatened or intimidated into surrendering myself to a predator like you. Sir Marcus's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little... That is enough. Sebastian moved forward, his presence suddenly dominating the hall. You will leave this house, Blackwell. You will not return. And if you publish a single word of those letters, if you so much as whisper my wife's name in public, I will destroy you. With what? You have nothing. I have everything. Sebastian's smile was cold, dangerous, utterly without mercy. Did you think I would not investigate you after you threatened my wife at the Morrison ball? Did you think I would not dig into every corner of your miserable life? He reached into his coat and withdrew a sheaf of papers of his own. I know about the fraudulent loans, Blackwell, the forged signatures, the elderly widows you've driven to ruin. I know about the gambling debts you've concealed from your creditors, the mistresses you've abandoned, the bastard children you refuse to acknowledge. I have enough evidence to see you prosecuted, imprisoned, and stripped of every penny you possess. Sir Marcus had gone pale. You wouldn't? I would, in a heartbeat. The only reason I have not done so already is that I wish to give you the chance to retreat gracefully. Sebastian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. But if you persist, if you attempt to harm my wife in any way, I will not only destroy you, I will make certain that everyone knows why. By the time I am finished, your name will be synonymous with dishonor. You will not be able to show your face in any respectable establishment in England. The silence that followed was absolute. Sir Marcus stood frozen, the papers trembling in his hand, his face a mask of impotent fury. This is not over, he said finally. Yes, Sebastian replied. It is. He gestured to the footman who had appeared at the edges of the hall. Escort Sir Marcus out. He is not welcome in this house. They watched in silence as Sir Marcus was removed, his protests echoing down the front steps until the door closed behind him. Then Sebastian turned to Arabella, and all the cold fury drained from his face, replaced by something softer, something that looked almost like hope. You said you loved me. I did. Did you mean it? Arabella looked at him, this cold, wounded, complicated man who had saved her without reason, married her without love, and just defended her honor with a ferocity that left her breathless. Yes, she said simply. I meant it. Sebastian crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. His kiss was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. It was desperate, passionate, full of all the emotion he had denied himself for 7 years. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with something she had never seen there before. I love you, he said. I should have told you sooner. I should have told you every day since we married. I have been a fool and a coward, and... She silenced him with another kiss. You are my husband, she said against his lips. That is what you are, and I would not have you any other way. They were still standing in the entrance hall, wrapped in each other's arms, when the butler appeared again this time with an expression of genuine distress. Your Grace, he said, and something in his voice made Arabella's heart clench. It's the Dowager Duchess. The doctor says, you should come quickly. Sebastian's face went white. He released Arabella and ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. She followed as quickly as she could, her heart pounding, her mind full of prayers to a God she was not certain she believed in. Please, please, not yet. Let us have more time. But time, it seemed, had run out. Lady Helena lay in her great bed, propped against pillows, her face as pale as the linen around her. The doctor stood by, grave-faced, and a maid wept quietly in the corner. Sebastian. Helena's voice was barely a whisper, but her eyes, those dark eyes, so like her grandson's, were still sharp, still aware. Come here, my boy. Sebastian crossed to the bed and took her hand, his composure cracking in ways Arabella had never seen. Grandmother. Hush. Helena smiled, a faint echo of her former mischief. No tears. Not yet. I have something to say, and I intend to say it while I still can. She turned her head slightly, searching the room until her gaze found Arabella. You too, child. Come here." Arabella approached the bed, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. She took Helena's other hand, feeling the frail bones, the paper-thin skin, the life that was slowly but inexorably slipping away. "I heard what happened downstairs," Helena said. "The servants told me. That dreadful Blackwell man, and Sebastian defending your honor, and the two of you finally admitting what has been obvious to everyone for weeks." "Grandmother?" I said, "Hush." Helena's grip tightened on both their hands. "I am dying, Sebastian. We all know it. But I am dying happy, and that is more than I dared to hope for when I woke this morning." She looked from one to the other, her eyes glistening. "You love each other. I can see it. I have seen it growing between you since the day you met, even when you were both too stubborn and too frightened to admit it. And that love, that connection, is the greatest gift you could have given me." "You gave us to each other," Arabella said, her voice breaking. "If not for you, if not for me, Sebastian would still be hiding behind his walls, and you would still be struggling alone. Yes, I know." Helena smiled. "I may be old, but I am not foolish. I knew what I was doing when I insisted he marry. I knew he would find someone special, someone who could reach him where no one else had. I just did not expect it to happen so quickly or so beautifully." She squeezed their hands one last time, then released them. "Now go," she said. "Both of you. I am tired, and I need to rest, but I will sleep well tonight, knowing that when I am gone, Sebastian will not be alone. Grandmother, please, no arguments." Helena's eyes drifted closed. "I love you, my boy. I have always loved you, and I am so proud of the man you are becoming." Sebastian bent and kissed her forehead, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Arabella touched his arm, offering what comfort she could, her own tears finally breaking free. They left the room together, hand in hand, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows. Lady Helena died peacefully in her sleep 3 days later, surrounded by the people she loved, secure in the knowledge that her grandson had finally found his way back to the light. And in the days that followed, days of mourning and grief, and the painful business of saying goodbye, Arabella and Sebastian clung to each other with a desperation that went beyond words. Their marriage had begun as a bargain. It had become something far more precious, a partnership, a love story, a light in the darkness. But the story was not over yet. There were still obstacles to overcome, still wounds to heal, still battles to fight. And as Arabella stood beside her husband at his grandmother's funeral, her hand clasped tightly in his, she made a silent vow. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks following Lady Helena's death passed in a haze of grief and ritual. There were callers to receive, letters of condolence to acknowledge, a funeral to arrange and endure. Sebastian moved through it all with the rigid composure Arabella had come to recognize as his armor against pain, the granite duke once more, showing the world nothing but cold control while his heart quietly shattered behind his walls. But at night, in the privacy of their chambers, that armor fell away. The first night after Helena died, Arabella had lain awake in her bed, listening to the silence of the house, when she heard a sound through the connecting door, a raw, broken sound that made her heart clench with sympathetic anguish. She rose without thinking, crossed to the door, and found it unlocked. Sebastian sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the sobs he had refused to shed in public. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes, those storm-grey eyes that had seemed so cold when she first met him, were red-rimmed and devastated. "Arabella." Her name was a broken whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." She crossed to him and sat beside him on the bed, close enough to touch, but not yet touching. "Sebastian, you don't have to apologize for grieving. I should be stronger than this. She was old. She was ill. I knew this was coming. I had months to prepare. There is no preparing for loss." Arabella took his hand, feeling the tremor that ran through him at her touch. "There is only surviving it, and you don't have to survive it alone." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression broke her heart. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to feel this much and still function. I spent 7 years not feeling anything, and now you feel everything. I know." She lifted her free hand and touched his face, her thumb tracing the track of a tear down his cheek. "It's terrifying. It's overwhelming. It feels like it might destroy you. But it won't, Sebastian. I promise you, it won't." "How can you promise that?" "Because I've been where you are. When my mother died, when my father's debts were revealed, when everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a lie, I thought the grief would kill me. I thought if I let myself feel it, I would never stop crying." She held his gaze, willing him to understand. "But I survived, not by refusing to feel, but by letting myself feel everything and trusting that I would come out the other side. And I did. And you will too." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered. "Please. I don't want to be alone." So Arabella stayed. She lay beside him in the darkness, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart, and listened as his breathing slowly evened out into sleep. She did not sleep herself, not for hours, but it didn't matter. What mattered was being there. What mattered was showing him that he didn't have to carry his grief alone. What mattered was love, in all its painful, beautiful, terrifying glory. The funeral was held on a grey October morning, with rain threatening but never quite arriving. Half of London turned out to pay respects to the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield, and Arabella stood beside Sebastian in the family pew, her black-gloved hand clasped tightly in his. The service was beautiful. Helena would have approved of the music, the flowers, the eloquent eulogy delivered by a bishop who had known her for decades. But Arabella barely heard any of it. Her attention was focused entirely on Sebastian, on the rigid set of his jaw, on the way his hand gripped hers as though she were the only thing keeping him from drowning. Afterward, there was a reception at Thornfield House, an endless parade of mourners offering condolences and reminiscences. Sebastian received them with gracious composure, saying all the right things, playing the role of the grieving but dignified duke. Only Arabella could see the strain beneath the surface, the cracks forming in his careful facade. When the last guest finally departed, and the servants began clearing away the refreshments, Sebastian walked to the window of the drawing-room and stood staring out at the darkening sky. "She knew," he said quietly. "At the end, she knew that our marriage began as an arrangement, not a love match." Arabella joined him at the window, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "She told me as much the last time we spoke alone. She said she had always known, and she didn't mind. She said the origin of a love story matters less than its destination." Arabella smiled at the memory, even as tears pricked her eyes. "She said she had watched you change since our wedding, watched you become more human, more present, more alive. That was all she wanted, Sebastian. To see you happy." "Am I happy?" He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know anymore. I don't know what happiness feels like. All I know is that when I'm with you, the darkness recedes. When I'm with you, I can almost imagine a future worth living." That's a beginning." She reached up and touched his face, marveling as she always did at the way his expression softened at her touch. "The rest will come with time." "Will it?" His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his cheek. "The contract we signed, the terms of our arrangement, they specify that our marriage ends in 6 months. We've already used more than half that time. In a few weeks, nothing." Arabella held his gaze, letting him see the certainty in her eyes. "That contract means nothing anymore. It was written by 2 people who didn't know what they would become to each other. It doesn't account for love, Sebastian. It doesn't account for us." "Are you saying you want to stay?" "I'm saying I never want to leave." She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his lips, soft, gentle, full of promise. "I'm saying that whatever future you can imagine, I want to be part of it. I'm saying that I love you, Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Thornfield, and I will go on loving you until my last breath, contract or no contract." Sebastian's arms came around her, pulling her close, and when he kissed her back, there was nothing gentle about it. It was desperate and consuming, full of grief and hope, and a hunger that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her lips. "Probably not," she agreed, and felt him smile against her mouth. "But I'm afraid you're stuck with me regardless. I can think of worse fates." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, as the autumn darkness gathered around them and the house settled into silence. Outside, the threatened rain finally began to fall, drumming softly against the windows, washing the world clean. It was, Arabella thought, a fitting way to begin again. But beginnings, she discovered, were rarely simple. The weeks after Helena's funeral brought new challenges, some expected, some entirely unforeseen. Sebastian threw himself into managing his grandmother's estate, settling her affairs with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized everything he did. There were bequests to distribute, properties to dispose of, a lifetime of accumulated possessions to sort through and assign to their proper recipients. Arabella helped where she could, spending long hours in Helena's private sitting room, carefully cataloguing the old woman's correspondence and personal effects. It was there, in a hidden compartment of Helena's writing desk, that she found the letters. They were old, decades old, judging by the yellowed paper and faded ink, and they were addressed to someone named William. Arabella knew she should not read them, knew they were private correspondence that had nothing to do with her. But something about the way they had been hidden, the care with which they had been preserved, made her hesitate. She took them to Sebastian that evening, finding him in his study surrounded by estate documents. "I found these in your grandmother's desk," she said, placing the bundle on his blotter. "I didn't read them, at least, not more than a few lines, but I thought you should see them." Sebastian picked up the topmost letter, his eyes scanning the opening lines. His expression changed as he read surprise first, then something softer, something that looked almost like wonder. "These are from my grandfather," he said slowly, "from before they were married. I didn't know they still existed. Helena kept them hidden for a reason. Perhaps she didn't want anyone to read them. Perhaps—" Sebastian set down the letter he was holding and looked at her. "Or perhaps she kept them hidden because they were too precious to share, too private, too revealing." He fell silent, his eyes distant, and Arabella knew he was thinking of his own letters, the contract negotiations, the careful legal language, the correspondence that Sir Marcus had tried to use against them. What would their letters reveal if someone found them decades from now? What picture would they paint of a marriage that had begun as a transaction and transformed into something neither of them had expected? "May I read them?" she asked. "If you think Helena wouldn't mind." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Then he gathered the letters and handed them to her. "Read them," he said. "And then tell me what you find. I think it might be important." The letters told a love story. Arabella read them that night, curled up in the chair by her bedroom fire, her eyes growing wider with each passing page. Helena's grandfather, William, a young man of modest means and limitless ambition, had fallen in love with the daughter of a duke, a match so far above his station that it should have been impossible. But Helena had loved him back, with a passion that blazed through every line of her responses. They had fought for each other. They had defied her family, endured scandal, weathered years of separation, while William built the fortune that would eventually make him worthy of her in society's eyes. And through it all, they had written letters full of longing and hope and the unshakable conviction that their love was worth any sacrifice. He waited 7 years for her, Arabella told Sebastian the next morning, finding him at breakfast. 7 years of working and planning and refusing to give up, even when everyone told him it was hopeless. And she waited too. She turned down a dozen proposals from men her family considered suitable, because none of them were William. "I knew they loved each other," Sebastian said slowly. "I remember them together when I was young. But I didn't know the story of how they met. Grandmother never spoke of it. Perhaps it was too private, too precious." Arabella sat down across from him, the letters still clutched in her hands. "But I think she kept these for a reason, Sebastian. I think she wanted someone to find them eventually, someone who needed to know that love like theirs was possible. Someone like me? Someone like us." She set the letters on the table between them. "Don't you see? Helena knew from the beginning that our marriage was an arrangement, but she also knew or hoped that it could become something more. These letters are her legacy, Sebastian, her proof that love can grow from the most unpromising beginnings, her gift to the grandson she adored and the woman she hoped would save him." Sebastian stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't need saving," he said quietly. "Not anymore. But I think I understand what you mean. Grandmother wasn't just giving us her blessing. She was giving us her story, showing us that what we have is not so different from what she had with William. A love that grew from impossible circumstances. A love that defied expectation. A love worth fighting for." "Yes." His grip tightened on her hand. "A love worth fighting for." November arrived with bitter winds and early snow, and with it came news that Sir Marcus Blackwell had fled England for the continent. The information came through Sebastian's solicitor, who had been monitoring Sir Marcus's activities since the confrontation at Thornfield House. It seemed that the evidence Sebastian had gathered, the fraudulent loans, the forged signatures, the pattern of predatory behavior, had reached the ears of certain powerful men who took a dim view of such practices. Sir Marcus, facing ruin and possible prosecution, had chosen exile over exposure. "He won't be coming back," Sebastian told Arabella, finding her in the conservatory where she had taken to spending her mornings. "My contacts on the continent will ensure he finds no welcome there either. He'll spend the rest of his life moving from place to place, one step ahead of his creditors and his conscience." Good. Arabella felt no satisfaction in Sir Marcus's downfall, only relief, a deep, bone-weary relief that the threat which had haunted her for 3 years was finally, truly gone. "I don't wish him ill exactly, but I'm glad he can't hurt anyone else." "You're more generous than I am." Sebastian sat down beside her on the wrought-iron bench, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I wish him every ill fate can devise. He tried to destroy you, Arabella. He tried to take you from me. If I could have him publicly flogged without scandal, I would do it cheerfully." Arabella leaned into his warmth, smiling despite herself. The Granite Duke, calling for public floggings. How barbaric. I am not so civilized as people suppose." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Particularly where you are concerned." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow fall beyond the glass walls of the conservatory. It was moments like this that Arabella treasured most, not the grand declarations or passionate embraces, but the quiet companionship, the sense of being truly known and accepted by another person. She had spent so many years alone, so many years relying only on herself, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have a partner, someone who shared her burdens without being asked, someone who celebrated her triumphs and mourned her losses as though they were his own, someone who looked at her across a crowded room and made her feel like the most important person in the world. She had that now. She had Sebastian, and she would never take it for granted. "I've been thinking," Sebastian said, breaking the silence, "about the contract." "What about it?" "It specified a 6-month duration for our marriage. That period ends in 3 weeks. He turned to look at her, his expression unusually serious. "I know we've discussed this. I know we agreed that the contract no longer matters, but I want to make it official. I want to destroy the document, publicly if necessary, so there can never be any doubt about the nature of our union." Arabella considered this. "And what would you replace it with?" "Nothing. Everything." He took her hands in his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "I want to marry you again, Arabella. Properly this time, not by special license in a private chapel, but in a church, with witnesses, with all the ceremony and celebration you deserve. I want to stand before God and the world and promise to love you for the rest of my life. I want to give you the wedding you should have had in the first place." "Sebastian, I know it's not strictly necessary. I know that in the eyes of the law we're already married. But I need for our marriage to begin again, on the right foundation this time. Not convenience or desperation or obligation, but love. Pure and simple and uncomplicated love." Arabella felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of joy so profound it was almost painful. "You impossible man," she whispered. "Don't you know by now that I would marry you 100 times over, in any circumstances, with or without ceremony? Is that a yes? It is a yes. It is 1,000 yeses. It is every yes I have ever spoken or will ever speak, all rolled into one." She leaned forward and kissed him, trying to pour everything she felt into that single gesture, her love, her gratitude, her absolute certainty that she had found her home in his arms. "When?" "As soon as possible. The reading of the banns will take 3 weeks. We can be married by Christmas." "Christmas?" Arabella repeated and smiled. "A new beginning for a new year." "Exactly." Sebastian's answering smile transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter, happier than she had ever seen him. "And this time, my love, I intend to do it right." The second wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield was the social event of the winter season. Sebastian had spared no expense. The church was decorated with hothouse flowers and hundreds of candles, the choir imported from a cathedral renowned for its musical excellence, the guest list comprising everyone who was anyone in London society. If there had ever been any doubt about the legitimacy of their marriage, this celebration would put it to rest once and for all. Arabella wore white, this time ivory silk overlaid with delicate lace, a gown so beautiful it had made her weep when she first saw it. Her hair was dressed with pearls and white roses, and she carried a bouquet of winter jasmine that filled the air with its sweet, heady scent. Oliver had come down from Cambridge to give her away, and as he walked her down the aisle, her little brother, now a young man on the verge of his own bright future, Arabella felt her heart overflow with gratitude. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate woman with no options and no hope. Now she was surrounded by love, walking toward a man who looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in the universe. The ceremony was everything the first had not been: joyful, celebratory, full of genuine emotion. When Sebastian spoke his vows, his voice rang clear and strong through the church, and Arabella saw tears glittering in the eyes of more than one hardened society matron. "I, Sebastian William Ashworth, take thee, Arabella Grace, to be my wedded wife," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I plight thee my troth." When it was her turn, Arabella's voice trembled slightly, but she spoke every word with conviction. She meant them every syllable, every promise, in a way she had not entirely meant them the first time. This was not an arrangement. This was not a transaction. This was love, real and true and lasting. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar declared. "You may kiss the bride." This time Sebastian did not settle for a chaste brush of lips. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, thoroughly, scandalously, a kiss that drew gasps and then laughter and then applause from the assembled guests. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," she replied. Now and always. The wedding breakfast was held at Thornfield House, where the great ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland of silver and white. The finest champagne flowed freely, the food was exquisite, and the music was provided by an orchestra that had played for royalty. Arabella moved through the celebration in a happy daze, accepting congratulations and good wishes from people who had once looked down upon her as beneath their notice. Lady Whitmore, her former employer, embraced her with genuine warmth, and declared that she had always known Arabella was destined for great things. Several of the young ladies who had cut her during her years as a companion now sought her acquaintance with transparent eagerness. She might have found their hypocrisy amusing if she had cared enough to dwell on it. But the truth was, she didn't. The opinions of society had ceased to matter to her somewhere in the past 6 months. All that mattered was Sebastian, who hovered at her elbow all day, who found excuses to touch her at every opportunity, who looked at her with an expression of wonder that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You've created quite a sensation," Oliver remarked, finding her near the refreshment table during a brief lull in the social whirl. "I've heard no less than 6 people declare that yours is the love story of the century." Arabella laughed. "That seems rather excessive." "Does it?" The granite duke, famously cold and unapproachable, thawed by the power of true love. "It's like something out of a novel." Oliver's eyes sparkled with affectionate teasing. "I must admit, when you wrote to tell me you were engaged, I was terrified. I thought you'd sold yourself to some monster for my sake. But seeing you together, seeing how happy you are, I've never been more relieved to be wrong." "It did begin as a transaction," Arabella admitted. "I won't pretend otherwise. But it became something more almost immediately. Sebastian isn't the man the world thinks he is, Oliver. He's kind and thoughtful and generous, and he loves me in ways I never dared hope anyone would." "And you love him?" "More than I can say." She looked across the room to where Sebastian stood, deep in conversation with one of his parliamentary colleagues. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I spent so long believing I would never have this, never have love, never have a real home, never have a family of my own. And now I have all of it, and I keep waiting to wake up and discover it was all a dream." "It's not a dream, Bella." Oliver squeezed her hand. "It's your life. A life you deserve, after everything you've sacrificed. I just wish—" He broke off, his expression suddenly solemn. "What?" "I wish Mother and Father could see you now, I wish they could know how things turned out." He swallowed hard. "They would be so proud of you." Arabella felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "They would be proud of both of us. Father made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he loved us. And Mother—" She had to stop, the emotion too thick for words. "Mother would have adored Sebastian," Oliver finished for her. "She always did have a weakness for brooding, misunderstood men. Remember how she used to weep over Gothic novels?" That startled a laugh out of Arabella, breaking the tension. "I remember. And you're right, she would have taken one look at Sebastian and decided he was a hero in need of redemption. Which, in a way, he was. And you redeemed him." Oliver pressed a kiss to her cheek. "Now go back to your husband before he comes over here and glowers at me for monopolizing your attention. And be happy, Bella. That's all I want for you. Just be happy." "I will," she promised. "I am." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, it was entirely true. The months that followed were the happiest of Arabella's life. She and Sebastian settled into a rhythm of domestic contentment that she had never dared imagine. They breakfasted together each morning, discussing their plans for the day. They walked in the gardens when the weather permitted, and spent long evenings in the library when it did not, reading aloud to each other or simply sitting in companionable silence. Sebastian's work in Parliament consumed much of his time, but he always made room for her, always consulted her opinions on matters of policy, always valued her perspective, even when it differed from his own. She discovered, to her surprise, that she had a talent for political analysis, and she found genuine satisfaction in helping him navigate the complex waters of legislative reform. "You would have made an excellent MP," Sebastian told her one evening, after she had pointed out a flaw in a proposed bill that he had completely overlooked. "It's a pity women aren't permitted to stand for election." "Give it a century or two," Arabella replied. "Things change, eventually. They always do." "You're an optimist." "I'm a realist. A year ago, I was a ruined woman with no future and no hope. Now I'm the Duchess of Thornfield, wife to a man I love, with more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. If my circumstances can change so dramatically, why not the world's?" Sebastian pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I do love you, you know. Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not in the last hour. A terrible oversight. I love you, Arabella Ashworth. I will always love you. And I will always love you, even when you're being stubborn and difficult and impossibly overprotective. I am never overprotective. You had the footman shadowing me for 3 weeks after Sir Marcus fled the country. You didn't think I noticed, but I did." Sebastian had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I wanted to be certain he was truly gone. You can't fault me for wanting to keep you safe." "I don't fault you. I just wish you would trust me to tell you when I feel threatened, rather than assigning guards without consulting me." "I do trust you. I trust you more than anyone in the world." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But the thought of anything happening to you, the thought of losing you—" "You're not going to lose me." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm here, Sebastian. I'm not going anywhere. And no matter what challenges we face in the future, we'll face them together. That's what marriage means. That's what love means." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not the small, controlled smile he showed the world, but the wide, unguarded smile that was hers alone. "How did I ever manage without you?" "Poorly, I imagine." She kissed the corner of his mouth. "But you'll never have to find out." Spring came to London with its usual profusion of green shoots and blooming flowers, and with it came news that would change everything. Arabella had suspected for several weeks the signs were unmistakable, once she knew what to look for, but she waited until she was certain before telling Sebastian. She chose a quiet evening, when they were alone in the sitting room that had become their private sanctuary. "I have something to tell you," she said, setting aside the book she had been pretending to read. "Something important." Sebastian looked up from his correspondence, concern flickering across his features. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No." "Nothing is wrong." She crossed to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his hands in hers. "Sebastian, I'm going to have a child." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Sebastian stared at her, his face utterly blank, and for one terrible moment Arabella feared she had misread everything, that he didn't want children, that this news would drive a wedge between them, that their happiness was about to come crashing down around them. Then his expression crumbled, and she saw tears, actual tears, gathering in his eyes. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. Our child." She squeezed his hands, feeling the tremor that ran through him. "I know we never discussed. I know this wasn't part of our original arrangement, but I thought I hoped. Arabella." Her name was a broken prayer on his lips. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A child. We're going to have a child. Are you happy? Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, and she saw that the tears had spilled over, tracking down his cheeks in glittering lines. "I am terrified. I am overwhelmed. I am so full of joy. I don't know how to contain it." He laughed, a sound of pure wonder. "I never thought after Eleanor. I never allowed myself to hope. I know." She reached up to wipe his tears away, her own eyes blurring. "I know what you lost. I know what this means to you. But this is different, Sebastian. We are different. We love each other truly, completely, and whatever challenges this brings, we'll face them together." "Together," he repeated. "Yes, together." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, as though she had become something precious and fragile. When he pulled away, his hands cradled her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you," he said. "I love you, and I will love our child, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the gift you've given me." "You already deserve it." She covered his hands with her own. "You've always deserved it. You just needed someone to show you." The months of Arabella's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparations and anticipation. Sebastian, true to his nature, threw himself into the task of ensuring her comfort and safety with military precision. The nursery was prepared with the finest furnishings money could buy. The best doctors in London were consulted. An army of servants stood ready to attend to her every need. "You're hovering," Arabella told him one afternoon, when she found him lurking outside her sitting room for the third time in an hour. "I am not hovering. I am merely ensuring your well-being." "By standing in the corridor looking anxious?" "I was not looking anxious. I was thinking. There is a difference." Arabella laughed and pulled him into the room. "Come and sit with me. I promise I won't break." He sat beside her on the chaise, his hand coming to rest on the swell of her belly, with a gentleness that never failed to move her. The baby kicked against his palm, and Sebastian's expression transformed into one of such naked wonder that Arabella felt tears prick her eyes. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "When the baby moves like that?" "No. It feels strange, like butterflies, or bubbles rising but not painful. Just alive." She covered his hand with hers. "Our child is alive and growing, Sebastian. In a few months, we'll be able to hold it in our arms." "Are you frightened?" She considered the question honestly. "A little. Childbirth is dangerous, we both know that. But I trust the doctors, and I trust my own strength, and I trust you to be beside me through whatever comes." She met his eyes. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Every time I think about what could go wrong." "Don't." She pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't think about what could go wrong. Think about what will go right. Think about holding our child for the first time. Think about teaching them to ride, to read, to navigate the complexities of society. Think about the family we're building together." "The family we're building," he repeated softly. "I never thought I would have that. I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything, my love. You deserve happiness and joy and a house full of children who adore you." She smiled. "And if this baby is anything like its father, we're in for quite an adventure." "God help us all," Sebastian murmured, but he was smiling too. Henry William Ashworth, future Duke of Thornfield, entered the world on a crisp October morning, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry that could be heard throughout the house. Arabella, exhausted but triumphant, held her son for the first time and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce and primal it took her breath away. He was perfect 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and eyes that would eventually settle into his father's storm grey. Sebastian had been beside her through the labour, holding her hand, murmuring encouragements, pale with terror, but refusing to leave. When the doctor finally placed the baby in Arabella's arms, she looked up to find her husband openly weeping. "He's beautiful," Sebastian whispered. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I don't have words." "Then don't speak." She reached out to touch his face. "Just be here. That's all I need." He climbed onto the bed beside her, careful not to jostle the sleeping infant, and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of them, a family at last. "Thank you," Sebastian said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." "We gave it to each other," Arabella replied. "That's what love is, Sebastian. Not one person giving and another receiving, but both of us building something together. Something neither of us could have created alone. Our family. Our family." She looked down at their son, so small and vulnerable and impossibly precious. "The first of many, I hope." Sebastian's arm tightened around her. "As many as you want. As many as you can bear. I will love them all, and I will love you most of all, until the day I die and beyond. That's quite a promise. It's the only promise that matters." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Arabella Ashworth. I will always love you. And I will always love you." She closed her eyes, sinking into the warmth of his embrace. "Always and forever. Till death us do part." Outside the window, the October sun broke through the clouds, flooding the room with golden light. And in that moment, surrounded by love and hope and the promise of a future she had never dared dream of, Arabella knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. A home, a family, a love that would last forever. 7 years later, the gardens of Thornfield Court were in full bloom, a riot of colour against the grey stone of the ancient manor house. Arabella stood at the window of her private sitting room, watching her children play on the lawn below, and felt her heart overflow with a contentment so profound it was almost painful. Henry, at 7, was the image of his father, dark-haired and grey-eyed, with Sebastian's intensity and, unfortunately, his tendency toward stubbornness. He was currently attempting to teach his younger sister the finer points of cricket, with limited success. Eleanor named for Sebastian's first wife, in a gesture of healing that had moved Arabella to tears when he proposed it was 5 years old and entirely her own person. She had Arabella's brown eyes and stubborn chin, her grandmother Helena's mischievous smile, and a personality that managed to be simultaneously sweet and utterly ungovernable. At the moment, she was ignoring her brother's cricket instructions in favor of picking wildflowers. And then there was William, the baby of the family at 3 years old, toddling across the grass on unsteady legs with his nurse in close pursuit. He was the quietest of the three, with a dreamy disposition and a smile that could charm the hardest heart. 3 children, more than Arabella had ever imagined having, each one a miracle, each one beloved beyond measure. A familiar pair of arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Sebastian's embrace. "Wool gathering?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Remembering." She turned in his arms to face him, marvelling as she always did at how much he had changed since that night in Lord Pemberton's study. The coldness was gone, the granite facade cracked open to reveal the warm, loving man beneath. He smiled easily now, laughed often, and touched his children with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Remembering what? Everything. The night we met, our first wedding, our second wedding, the day Henry was born. She reached up to trace the lines at the corners of his eyes, lines that came from smiling, from years of happiness. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If I hadn't run into that study, if you hadn't hidden me, if I hadn't been desperate enough to accept your proposal? I try not to. He pulled her closer, resting his chin on the top of her head. The thought of a life without you, without our children, is unbearable. I prefer to focus on what is, rather than what might have been. And what is rather wonderful, isn't it? Beyond wonderful. Beyond anything I ever dared hope for. He pulled back to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. Do you know what I thought, that first night, when you burst into my hiding place and begged me to save you? What? I thought you were the most inconvenient thing that had ever happened to me. I was there to be alone, to brood, to wallow in my misery. And then you appeared, desperate and beautiful, and entirely too alive. You disrupted everything I had built around myself, every wall, every defense. And now I thank God every day for sending you to me. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. You saved me, Arabella, not just from loneliness, but from myself. You showed me that the man I thought I was cold, unfeeling, incapable of love, was not the man I had to be. You gave me the courage to become something better. We saved each other, she corrected. That's what I told you years ago, and it's still true. Neither of us was whole before we met. We were both broken, both hiding, both convinced we were unworthy of love. We found each other in the darkness and helped each other into the light. My philosophical Duchess. He smiled, that private smile that was hers alone. Have I told you today that I love you? Not since breakfast. An inexcusable lapse. He pulled her against him, his lips brushing her ear. I love you, Arabella Ashworth. I have loved you since the moment you crashed into my life and refused to be intimidated by my coldness. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you. She wound her arms around his neck, feeling the familiar warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against hers. Always and forever. More today than yesterday. More tomorrow than today. Outside, a shriek of childish laughter drew their attention. Eleanor had abandoned the wildflowers and was now chasing Henry across the lawn, while William clapped his hands in delight. The scene was chaotic, noisy, thoroughly undignified, and absolutely perfect. We should join them, Arabella said reluctantly. Before Eleanor catches Henry and starts pulling his hair again. In a moment. Sebastian tightened his arms around her. First, I want to remember this. You, here, in my arms. Our children playing in the garden. The life we've built together. I never want to forget how lucky I am." "You're not lucky," she told him. "You're loved. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Lucky is chance. Love is choice." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "I chose you, Sebastian. Every day I choose you. And I will go on choosing you until the stars fall from the sky." Quite a commitment. I'm quite a committed person. He laughed, that free, open laugh she had worked so hard to unlock, and kissed her properly, thoroughly, scandalously, right there in front of the window where anyone might see. "Papa, Mama, come play with us." Henry's voice floated up from the garden, imperious and demanding. Arabella smiled against Sebastian's lips. Duty calls. Duty can wait. But he was already releasing her, already reaching for her hand to lead her downstairs. "Though I suppose we should rescue Henry before your daughter conquers him entirely. She gets her determination from you. She gets her stubbornness from you." They bickered amiably as they descended the stairs, their voices mingling with the sounds of the household servants bustling, dogs barking, children shrieking with glee. It was chaos. It was noise. It was everything Arabella had never dared to dream of during those dark years of survival and solitude. It was home. They emerged into the sunshine, and three small bodies immediately converged upon them. Henry demanded that Papa watch him bowl. Eleanor presented Mamma with a bouquet of slightly crushed wildflowers. William simply held up his arms to be carried, and Sebastian obliged, settling the toddler on his hip with practiced ease. Arabella stood back for a moment, watching her family, feeling the warm weight of the flowers in her hands and the warmer weight of love in her heart. She thought of the frightened woman who had fled through Lord Pemberton's house 7 years ago, desperate and hunted and entirely without hope. She thought of the cold, wounded man who had pulled her into an alcove and demanded payment for his protection. She thought of all the obstacles they had overcome, all the walls they had broken down, all the love they had built from the ruins of their separate griefs. "Hide me," she had begged the stranger. "That will cost you," he had replied. And oh, what a cost it had been. Not the cost he had demanded that night, not the business arrangement, the temporary marriage, the careful transaction between two people too afraid to feel. The real cost had been far greater. The real cost had been vulnerability, trust, the terrifying leap of faith required to open one's heart to another person. But the reward was everything. Sebastian looked up from where Henry was demonstrating his cricket technique and caught her eye. His smile, as always, transformed his face. The granite duke melted away, and in his place stood simply a man who loved his wife, his children, his life. "Are you coming?" he called. Arabella smiled back and walked toward her family, toward her future, toward the love that had started with a desperate bargain and become the greatest gift of her life. "Always," she said, "I'm always coming home." And as the Thornfield family played together in the golden afternoon light, laughing and loving and living, Arabella knew that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not just safety, not just security, not just the absence of fear, but joy. Pure, uncomplicated, overwhelming joy. The kind that cost everything and was worth every penny.